Thank you very much, Emilio, for giving this overview or policy perspective and overview of the projects from the Green Buildings Council. I hope that you will be one of the ambassadors for the OptEEmAL solution. Very well. Great. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to welcome Arnaud Andrews from Nottingham City Council and Energiesprong UK. He's going to present the Energiesprong Model, an approach to nearly zero energy retrofitted buildings. And we can discuss the nearly zero point, I guess. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad Emilio got here in 5 minutes. It took me 9 hours. Some days you're lucky, some days you're not. That's what I'm looking for. So I have too many jobs. I'm here for 2 of them. I work for Nottingham City Homes, which is associated with Nottingham City Council. I also work for Energiesprong UK. Our earlier presenters have talked at quite a high level. We are kind of on the coalface, doing the houses and working up in the other direction. I'm here under lots of European funding. My boss says go and talk. When I get home, she'll tell me which project it is. We're working with Cardiff on Remorben, and the project I'll talk about most is funded by Remorben. I'm probably here today under an Interreg E=0 project, and if you invite me back in 4 months, I'll be under a DREAM ERDF project. So some of us in the UK do love Europe. Don't get the wrong impression. So I'll talk a bit about why Nottingham are looking at these projects. What is our thought process? What is our driver? That's really important. I'll explain what Energy Sprong is. I don't think Energy Sprong has reached Spain, so some of you may not have heard of it. We'll talk about the business model, because the finance is important. If we can make the finance work, then we can get more buildings done. The rate of retrofit is too slow. The business model is how we can accelerate that. Then I'll talk about the tenants and the results. It's not about buildings, it's about people. I'm an energy geek, I admit it. Some of you are too. We need to remember this is about people, not kilowatt hours. And then we'll do some of the challenges and next steps, which is kind of where this work fits in with that higher level, strategic district level stuff. So why? We have these 2050 targets. Each country's version of the target is the same thing. By 2050, we have to be great in energy terms. Recent political things in Europe will mean you'll know how spectacular UK politicians are. They love a big target. They love a big target as long as it's not too close. So a target for 2050 is great. So we launch a big target. We can all drink some kava, pat ourselves on the back. By 2050, we'll be carbon neutral. There'll be no fuel poverty. Everything will be brilliant. Super. We get up in the morning. Okay, how do we start? Now this is my term of office. I have to make difficult decisions. And then we get a bit scared. And that's why we have the diversions. We're here, we need to be there. What do? We go over there, because that's easy. So our short-term targets aren't necessarily the best targets to get to the 2050 targets. This is a tower block in Nottingham. It's in the same area as the project I'm going to talk about. It was deepish retrofitted, not nearly zero, just deepish retrofit, about 2 years ago. That included putting solid wall insulation right around the building. To do that, we took off insulation that had been put there when it was built, about 10 millimeters of polystyrene. And while we're taking it off, we're thinking, what were these crazy people thinking back then? Why were they only doing 10 mil? That's crazy now, as we put on our 100 mil. But then you start to think, what were they doing? Well, what they were doing is they were doing the standard of that day. And then you go, hang on, what are we doing? We're doing the standard of today. And actually, when we look forward to 2050, it's not enough. So we've just finished this, but actually, to get to 2050, we'll have to go back. And I don't know where you are with your building standards. With our new build standards, the houses we're building now will need retrofitting to hit 2050 standards. So we haven't yet even started building the houses ready for 2050 now. I don't know when we're going to start. We kind of yo-yo with where we are with our standards. Nottingham City Homes are a social housing provider. We manage homes for the most vulnerable in society for the long term. Nottingham City Council is quite progressive in environmental terms. We have just announced we're going to be carbon neutral by 2028. Not sure anybody knows exactly what that means, but we are going to do it and be the first ones in the UK to do it. It might be 2028 because Bristol announced they were going to be carbon neutral in 2030, so we decided we have to get in slightly faster. So, the big thing for us was a change in thought process. We don't want to chase today's grants. We don't want to think about today's targets. We want to think about where we are and where we need to be and the best way to get from one to the other. Not the easy way to do today's thing, the best way to do the long-term thing. So what is Energiesprong? Okay, what is Energiesprong in 5 minutes? Let's start with the name, Energiesprong. It's Dutch, it just means energy leap. Essentially, it's about net zero houses, not nearly net zero houses now. That's what we're trying to do. Hopefully you can work out that the one on the right is the Energiesprong one. Energiesprong is about what we have to achieve, not necessarily how you do it. So this is the typical solution to get to net zero. Complete insulation envelope everywhere. There's then typically lots of PV, so you have the generation to use the energy that you can't take away from space heating, etc. And they normally have something like a heat pump, so you have an efficient heating system too. That's the typical solution. What's important about the Energiesprong concept here is industrialisation of the process. At the moment, retrofit is labour intensive. A lot of builders on site for a long time doing things. We need to industrialise that process to drive the cost down. Remember how important the cost model is, and we'll come back to that. We were talking about people. There's a message to the consumer. Most of them aren't interested in kilowatts. What they want is to know they're going to be warm, comfortable, they've got enough hot water, they've got enough electricity to power their devices. Their home will be comfortable, quieter, better air quality. This is the message to consumers. In Holland, where this started, net zero energy means a net zero bill. So this is a kind of simple message. In the UK, the energy supply industry is far more complicated. So net zero energy means you pay a bill because you got a lot less for the energy that goes out than you pay for the energy that comes in. So Energiesprong has a kind of a big table of specifications, things that you have to meet as the builder. You'll see down here at the bottom somewhere. Here we go. Net consumption, 0 to 1500. A lot of the time in the UK, we're currently working on 1500. So we are nearly zero, not net zero yet, but it's really just a practical step. It's to get things moving, get us started. The more projects we can do, the more we can prove, the more difficult or challenging or positive we can make that target. In Nottingham, the Energiesprong specification wasn't hard enough. We went further than this because that's Nottingham. We always try and do more. If it's not challenging enough, we can make it more challenging. So this specification exists. What's important here is that we don't tell our provider, our builder, what to do. So we don't tell him to put 4 inches on the wall or 8 inches, 100 millimetres, 200 millimetres. I'm getting ready for Brexit already. We're going back to imperial measurements. It's up to the builder. So they decide if it's going to be double glazed or triple glazed. They decide where to spend the money. That's quite a different concept. So the core of Energiesprong and what it means to Nottingham. We're talking 2050 standards now. So it's about trying to hit the long-term targets immediately. What we procure, so when we buy the work from our builder, what we're buying from them is what they achieve, not the measures. We don't pay them for solid wall insulation. We pay them to deliver the standard we want. That's quite a different change. It made our procurement people very nervous at the start. What do you mean you're not telling them what to build? We're just telling them what to achieve. They can decide how to actually do that. It's about what the building actually does. So traditionally in the UK, and I would guess almost everywhere else, you have a model. You're going to put this insulation on the wall. It will then have a U value of X. That will provide a saving of Y. Then you go out and measure it, and it's always a bit disappointing. Somehow it never quite delivers what you want. So here, we are measuring the performance. The builder is on the hook. They are contracted to deliver that performance for 30 years in the real world. So in 29 years' time, if I'm still alive and one of our buildings doesn't perform, I can ring up the builder. Your building's now not working. You promised it would work for 30 years. You have to give us the money to give to the tenant or fix it. And that changes the job of the builder. When we procured this service, we said, this is what we will pay. Now you compete with each other on the quality of what you will deliver. So that their vested interest was to deliver work that actually worked, not to get it as cheap as possible to win the job and be gone in a year's time. Their interest is the same as ours, is the same as the tenants, that these buildings work for the long term. How's all this funded? Oh. So there's a simple model. This is the cost of all the work. It's expensive. It's paid for in savings. The two at the bottom. One of them is the energy saving. One of them is the maintenance savings. At the moment, you'll see this is less than that. So we're currently grant funded. We have a cost curve projection for this work. So in Holland, they started at around the €190,000 mark. They're already down to about 60,000 per house. So that industrialization process we were talking about has brought the cost down by about 30%. It needs to get down to around the 40,000 mark for it to be properly self-financing. So we're getting there. And in the UK, we have this conversation with government about them giving us enough grant, enough clarity, so we can do enough projects and follow that cost curve to get this down to that level. Of course, in the real world, the financial modelling is far more complicated than that simple graph. We have a big spreadsheet with umpteen different line items. It's interesting, when I went to school, 1 + 1 = 2. That's how you count. It's very straightforward. When you speak to the finance director and the accountants, they have their own ways of counting. It's no longer 1 + 1 = 2. You have to apply a discount to the one. And you have to apply an indexing to the other one. And the answer's -1 or +5 or 2. Everybody counts in different ways. So we have this model so that different organisations and different people in the organisations can all count in their own ways and get to the result. And this is actually a graph from a different project I'm working on, where their net present value for 30 years is basically 20 grand better if they do the Energy Sprong approach now than if they do business as usual. And they'll have a better house, and the business as usual isn't, in this case, accounting for that, the fact they'll probably have to spend more money to hit the 2050 targets later as well. So let's go back to the UK. I don't want to create an English stereotype, but two of the cornerstones of our communication strategy with our tenants were the chip shop and the pub. This was really important. We were doing something new. The project I'm talking about here was the first Energy Sprong project outside of Holland, so we're the first ones anywhere outside of Holland to actually do this. There was a lot of stuff to do, a lot of stuff to learn. We wanted the tenants to engage with us fully and be part of that process. So we did a lot of work to make the communication from them to us as easy as possible. We went to their house. We had the first meeting in one of the tenants' lounge. I went off to the chip shop, bought a sack of fish and chips, so we could sit round, eat together, talk about their homes, talk about their aspirations, make them feel part of the project. And then we did our subsequent meetings in the local pub. Normally before it opened, it's a bit rough. If you go later, people want to start a fight with you. Genuinely, it actually happened. Not the fight, but somebody tried to start one. But at 10 o'clock in the morning, it's safe. It was all about making sure tenants felt comfortable, told us what they thought, fed into the project. So here's the start of the procurement process. This is part of what turned out to be our winning team. So one of our tenants and the homes. You'll see another picture of those in a moment. I'm not quite sure what they were thinking when they designed these homes, but they have this, effectively this is a shed built into the underneath, and on the other side there's an undercroft. So both sides you've got extra floor area. They're what we call in the UK crosswall, which means they have a concrete spine, concrete ribs, they're all solid, and then these walls are made out of optimism and hope. I think I could run through one of those walls from if I took a run up. Some of them move if you do this. One of the reasons we did these homes was they've been on the political agenda. Should we knock them down and start again? If we'd knocked them down and started again, it would have cost us £125,000, something like that. So the £75,000 we spent to do this work was a kind of no-brainer. And we didn't disrupt the community, and we got a better product. So it was quite an easy choice. The more we do it, the more we get the cost down, the less that becomes a niche thing, and the more houses this will apply to. Interestingly, I can only use this photo because this tenant was insistent that his face wasn't in any of the publicity. He didn't want any photos or videos of him. But fortunately, it's the back of his head, so I was allowed to use it. So here's the before and after. That's how it was. That's how it is now. The pink and purple palette was chosen by the tenants. In our engagement process for the next phase, because we're doing this again, the main objection was that nobody wanted the pink and purple, but that's what these tenants chose, and that's fine. They can have what they like. So the solution here, we've got this complete wrapping thing. So we've pretty much put a house almost around the existing house. And as far as possible, we leave as much stuff where it is, because taking it off is more work on site. So we've got the complete envelope, about 5 kilowatts peak of PV on average across the roofs. We have a communal heating system, which is fed from ground source heat pumps, and we have a private wire system. So we now, as NCH, provide the electricity and the heating to these homes, which is important because it helps us to optimize the value from things like the PV. We've also got heat and electricity storage. So there's thermal storage in each house and in the energy centre, and we've got battery storage in the energy centre. So what have we achieved? The houses before depends on how you model it. If you use the national calculation methodology, it says they're quite good. It's almost a case study for how wrong our national calculation methodology can be. Realistically, it would have probably cost about £1,800 for these people to live in their homes and be warm and use energy in the modelled way. Most of them actually spent £600. That's because in the winter they basically lived in one room and tried to heat one room. The rest of the house was freezing. It was unpleasant to be in. You could see your breath. It was that unpleasant. So what have we done? This initial 10 homes have been done for a year, so we're looking at people's actual energy bills. Each blue bar is one of the houses. The grey line is our modelled target cost for them of £600 a year. The red line is the average of what they actually paid last year. So they're actually paying £500 per year. That's for all their energy. Now, it's pretty good, but when you think about it, this is verging on spectacular, because from that £500, £300 of that is what they're giving us to go back towards financing the work. So in the actual cost of energy, we're down to £200 a home. So that's the kind of level of retrofit. We're not at net zero here, but it's a kind of important stepping stone. Interestingly, this raises, as a social housing provider, all sorts of questions about what's fair. We have small bungalows and kind of big houses. When we set this at £600, we kind of thought that's cheap. They can all have a cheap bill. Should they be the same? Should we have a different price for larger houses and smaller houses? One we haven't quite answered yet. And probably next time we'll increase that target to 720. The specification will be the same, but we'll collect an extra £100 a year to go back towards the finance, because we know in practice that if we model it at 720, they'll only be paying 600 anyway. So let's look at some of the challenges. Let's see how good your maths is. So originally we had 10 houses. Each house has its own connection to the electricity grid. They cost £91 each. 10 houses at £91, a total collection of standing charges of 910. Because we're going to private wire, we take out all those 10 connections, and we just have our one. So how much is our one? Is it 91? Is it 910? Anybody want to guess? 2,300, that's where we started. And this is about the shift from what are officially domestic connections to what is now officially a commercial connection. It's quite important, this. The way that electricity charging and pricing works is complicated. Clearly, if you think about 2,300 for 10 people, that's 230 quid each. That wouldn't make our model work at all. That was, when you're doing innovation, you kind of have these days, don't you? You have the good days and you have the other days. This was one of those other days when we all wanted to crawl under the table and have a little cry. Fortunately, we went back to the supply side, we renegotiated that, persuaded them to do something different, and next week when I get back, there's a kind of the whole next phase of this process. Conscious of everybody's coffee. So, the way we buy electricity is simple. You receive a fairly simple bill, and that's what you pay. The real cost of that electricity is complicated. So let's just focus here. So this is for each hour of the day over the year, how much are we paying in transmission costs for our electricity? And this grey chart exactly maps how much we pay per kilowatt. So if you look at the red bit, this is how much electricity we use in the peak time, which is between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the evening, Monday to Friday. So that's the most expensive time in transmission costs. We use 20% of our electricity in those 3 hours a day, and that costs us 72% of our transmission cost. So 20% of the use, 72% of the cost in this element of the structuring. So if we can get rid of that, then we take 65% of that transmission cost away. It's only 3 hours. We've got all that thermal storage and our battery electrical storage. So we can come off the grid for those 3 hours. We just stop using anything from the grid. The heat comes out of our thermal tank. The electricity comes out of our battery. We can get rid of that cost. We get rid of that cost. That's either more money that can go back into our income to invest in the business model, or it can come off the tenant's bills, or a bit of both. This is where kind of what we're doing on the ground kind of comes back into how these projects feed into the regional picture. So we're just starting to engage with a small energy company, the DNO, who are the company who run the wires that send you the electricity, to change the way we pay for our energy. That gives us a bigger saving, and it means we can work more smoothly with the local energy grid. So I'll wrap up for coffee. So we spent a lot of money. Big spend, big ambition. And all along, right from the start, we said to ourselves, this is a better lives project. It's not about buildings or energy or kilowatts or carbon. We need to deliver better lives. And that makes the energy geeks think about these projects in a slightly different way. And here's one of our tenants on the local news telling everybody how brilliant their house is. And this is kind of part of what we were saying earlier about communication. Once people start telling each other how brilliant it is, then people start wanting the product. And the reason this is important is because this tenant, Ken Bennett, you might recognise the hat. This is the guy who was in the other photo who'd refused to have his face in any of the pictures we used in any publicity at the start. And now we've finished, he's on the national telly telling people how brilliant it is. So if you can get this right and take people with you, we can create something that works financially and actually makes people want to engage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arnoud. We have now completed our first session, or our first block for the day. I would like you all to come for coffee upstairs. You just walk out the room and take the little stairs upstairs. There will be some refreshments, and it would be great for us all to be back here by 11 to get into more technical details about the OptEEmAL platform. Thank you.